Hello everyone, Will here, and I've just been to the Holy Land. On the Friday before half term, me and 47 other pilgrims travelled from Luton Airport over to the Holy Land. We stayed there for a week and visited a bunch of different religious sites. I'm going to tell you some of my favourites. For the first half of the week, we stayed in Bethlehem, and I thought that was really nice because it was almost like we were starting it exactly where Jesus started. On the Saturday, we went to the Church of the Nativity, which is where Jesus was born. Now this is a legitimate place, and I know what you're thinking, it might not look how you imagined it. But that's because now it's a church, which is pretty cool. Later in the day we visited Shepherd's Fields, which was the actual place where the shepherds were when they heard about Jesus. I've personally found this really quite emotional because you could look over the hillside and really imagine what it must have been like to see these angels just appear in the sky. On Sunday we went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now this was the place where Jesus went with his disciples before he was captured and ultimately sentenced to death. It was really quite an emotional place, and some of the olive trees which you can see now were actually from the times of Jesus. We also saw a tiny little olive tree. Now this one was actually planted by Pope Francis not too long ago at all. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like in 2,000 years. Moving on to Monday, we went to see a charity called St. Martha's House. St. Martha's House was in Bethlehem and set up to look after elderly women and widows in the area that maybe didn't have anyone to spend time with. The women would go there in the day, and one of them actually described it as giving them a chance to exercise their mouths. Just someone to talk to, but it also organised activities for them to carry out throughout the day. This was definitely a highlight for me, as it was really nice to see what the actual local community is like now, and not what it was like 2,000 years ago. On Tuesday, we moved from Bethlehem and went up to Tiberias on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. I really loved this day, and especially the journey up there, because number one, we got to stop off at the lowest point on earth, the Dead Sea, and actually float in the water, which was phenomenal. Number two, we got to go to the River Jordan. Now in case you didn't know, this is the place where Jesus himself was baptised, and in particular the part we went to was the exact place they reckon John the Baptist baptised him. This was made so special, not only by being able to paddle in the water itself, but also witnessing people being baptised there today. 2,000 years later. For me, I think Wednesday was probably my favourite day of the whole trip. Jerusalem was great, however, you could kind of tell that it had seen 2,000 years of history. Lots of things had changed, and at parts it was quite hard to imagine what it would have been like when actually Jesus was there. However, in Galilee, it was still pretty much untouched. The scenery was just absolutely beautiful, and what I didn't actually know was the Sea of Galilee is in a collapsed volcano, so the volcanic soil around it just made everything the most beautiful green I'd ever seen in my life. On our first morning in Galilee, we went to the Mount of the Beatitudes. It was a really beautiful place, and was where the Sermon on the Mount was set in Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus taught us the Beatitudes. It was really a beautiful church there. It was octagonal shaped, one side for each beatitude, and in the middle was perpetual adoration, which was just absolutely phenomenal. In the afternoon, we were fortunate enough to go out on a boat onto the Sea of Galilee. Again, this was probably one of the highlights of the whole trip for me. It was beautiful, serene, and at one point they turned the engine off on the boat and we just floated. It was absolutely incredible. Everything was so peaceful, and you could just imagine that that was exactly how it was in Jesus' time. They didn't have engines on their boats, and he would have been in a boat in the middle of that sea at some point. To think that the water that we were on right there was the one that he walked on, the same water that Peter walked on, was really quite a powerful moment. On our final full day in the north of the Holy Land, we went to a town called Nazareth. Now you might recognise this one because it's where Jesus grew up, and you might have often heard of Jesus referred to as Jesus of Nazareth, because in those days that was like how you were known, it was where you were from. There we were so fortunate to go to this place called the Nazareth Village, which was like basically a reenactment of how Nazareth would have looked in Jesus' times. So it was like really easy to imagine like what Jesus would have seen, what he would have done, and they'd done everything using the traditional methods, and they were like had reenactments of carpenters' shops and like people making tapestries out of the traditional methods, and it was just absolutely incredible. And actually, a fun fact I learnt whilst I was there was that a carpenter 2,000 years ago didn't just work with wood, but also with stone. As our trip came to a close, on our final morning we visited Magdala. Now you might recognise this name from Mary of Magdala, who was one of Jesus' pretty famous disciples. She was an incredible woman of faith, and I highly recommend looking her up if you're not really familiar with what she did. Magdala was phenomenal, and there I think I saw the most beautiful church I think I've potentially ever seen in my life. It was really phenomenal, with a view that went straight over the Sea of Galilee behind the altar. There was also a synagogue, or the ruins of a synagogue, which they're like probably 99% certain Jesus preached in when he was going around that area, which is pretty cool. Anyway, there was literally so much more that happened, but I think I'm still trying to get my head around it all myself, and it's going to take me a bit of a while to process. So hopefully over the next few weeks I will be able to let you guys know more about different things as I remember them and figure out them. But for now, if you leave your comments below and maybe ask if you want to know more about something I've mentioned, or maybe ask if I went to a certain place, because I might have forgotten to mention it. Like I say, there was loads more that I did. But until then, don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell, and I'll see you soon.